Ruben joined the APR in the spring of 2023, bringing over 14 years of multidisciplinary experience in the plastics and paper packaging and reclamation industries. Please join me in welcoming Ruben.
Thank you. Is this package recyclable? As a program director at the Association of Plastic Recyclers, I hear this question probably more often than any other person on the planet. It comes from those involved in the supply chain, from converters, manufacturers, and brands, my friends and family, the packaging nerd voice in my head anytime I get a takeout container or pick up a new package. It's becoming more obvious daily that sustainability and recyclability is at the forefront of consumers, marketers, brands, everybody's mind. Last Friday, I was on a call with a fairly large CPG North American company. They were looking to redesign a package to make their substrates more recyclable. It became evidently more obvious throughout that conversation that they were much further behind than what they originally thought. By the end, I often received the question, what one thing could I do to make this package more recyclable? And my answer more often than not is change your label. Labels have the potential to impact plastics recyclability more so than almost any other design feature. They can make or break the recyclability of a package. A perfectly recyclable package with an inappropriately designed label will more than likely take a long and expensive trip to the landfill, where one with an appropriate label allows that package to enter our plastic circular economy, providing more value for all of us within the supply chain. So who is the APR? We are an international trade association with a sole focus on plastics recycling. We are the only trade association in North America with that focus, and our mission is very simple: get more plastics recycled. Our membership spans the entire supply chain. Our core affiliates are our reclaimers and recyclers. These are the people on the ground converting materials into new materials, taking your plastic recycling and turning into viable resources for companies to use and integrate within their packaging. To achieve this feat, we have to bring the entire supply chain to the table. Could I get a raise of hands for those in the room that are APR members? It's great to see so many of you. These are your plastics recycling champions for the industry. They are setting the groundwork for our guidance, programs, and protocols to create a pathway for more sustainable packaging. As APR staff, we do not get to thank them enough. So if we could we please give those in the room a round of applause for their participation and guidance. We like to say our programs are circular by design. And what does this mean? What goes in must come out. So we want to make sure that we provide resources for designers, for brands, for manufacturers and converters to design their packaging to more appropriately fit within the reclamation stream. We do this through our design guides, our recognition programs, outreach, bale specifications, a variety of programs. On the other side, our Demand Champions program, APR PCR certification, and Buyers and Sellers Directory dictate the quality and supply of materials coming out of the system as well. And then our policy and education work help to facilitate both sides of that equation. How does the APR define recyclability? Recyclability is more complex than just a simple design. A designer or a marketer must take into account population access, markets, acceptance, on top of just the design to determine if a product is appropriately recyclable in the region or country for which it's being manufactured and sold. We incorporate that design aspect. When making that claim of recyclability utilizing the APR standards, one must look beyond just design. We are a piece of the puzzle, but we look to facilitate the solution. When assessing a package for recyclability, we must break it down into its individual components. A package is made of multiple components: attachments, colorants, shape, size, adhesives, labels, inks, multiple layers, polymers, additives. Every single one of these components can have a direct and immediate impact of the recyclability of a plastic product. Each individual one needs to be assessed individually, and then ultimately the product as a whole. So when we assess these individual features, they are assigned one of four values: either APR design preferred, detrimental to recycling, renders the package non-recyclable, or requires testing. APR preferred means that that component provides the highest yield and quality within the reclamation stream. A detrimental categorization means that there is some aspect to that component which is going to diminish the yield or quality as that product traverses reclamation. And then ultimately something that is non-recyclable is going to be non-recyclable. It will take that long and expensive trip to the landfill. A categorization of needs testing means that more additional research needs to be conducted to really assess the recyclability of that package. When looking at a full package, we combine all of those elements together. As long as every single component of a package is considered APR preferred, that entire package is considered preferred. If any one of those elements is categorized as detrimental, it will render the entire package tolerated but needs improvement. This does not mean that the package is non-recyclable. It means that it does not meet our highest standard of recyclability within the reclamation stream. It's still accepted, we still want the material, but we could do better as an industry. And then again, if any one of those components is non-recyclable, so just a single component on a otherwise perfectly recyclable container, that entire package is going to be ejected and take that expensive trip to the landfill. So it's very mindful to keep in front of those first two brackets when assessing recyclability. And how does that align with other organizations? Those customers that you may have that are participating in the TRP's Pathway to Circularity or signatories to the U.S. Plastics Pact have agreed to operate within that preferred dictation. So the APR's definition of recyclability really expands preferred and tolerated but needs improvement, but that best foot forward is going to be in the green bracket. We just discussed EPR, California, Truth in Labeling regulations. They have adopted and cauterized the APR design guidance into their current legislation. Again, that definition falls within the tolerated but needs improvement through preferred categorizations. So as long as any one of those individual components is not dictating that the product is non-recyclable, it will meet the California definition for recyclability. I often get asked, how do our programs interrelate with how to recycle? Why does my package with a preferred dictation have a check locally or potentially even non-recyclable designation by how to recycle? The answer for that is you must look back to that puzzle piece that I originally showed earlier. Beyond just design, we have to take into account population access, end markets, and acceptance, which is what How to Recycle SPC is assessing beyond the APR's technical guidance. They use our technical expertise as the backbone, but something such as motor oil or pesticides in a perfectly recyclable package is not accepted within the municipal curbside stream due to peripherals out of the control of the packaging designer. So, what I came here to talk about today is the APR Design for Recyclability Recognition Program. I'll discuss how to traverse this, the benefits of it, and then provide some key design considerations that must be made when looking to participate or design your packaging appropriately, labels in specific, for recyclability. So what is the APR Design for Recyclability program and what benefits does it provide? This is an independent third-party verification that a packaging design really meets that preferred criteria within the APR's definition. Again, we look at recyclability beyond preferred, but this is more or less an award for designing to the highest standard possible within the industry. It's going to provide yourself and your customers confidence that they're making claims appropriately. It mitigates risk. It helps confirm that you are in compliance with pending regulations, upcoming EPR schemes, as well as provides credibility for your innovations and efforts. There are three different pathways for APR recognition: the preferred design, critical guidance, and responsible innovation. Many of you that have been around the industry as long as myself or longer may be very familiar with our critical guidance recognition. This was the original inception of recognition by the APR, but over the last few years, this program has expanded. All pathways lead to the same recognition. It is the APR Design for Recyclability recognition. It is not critical guidance. It is not preferred design. It is not responsible innovation. You get the same output at the end. They differ based on the level of assessment that is needed to be completed. So a preferred design pathway for recognition is what I like to state as an acknowledgement of design. Our design guides go through and curate a dictation for each individual component as being preferred, detrimental, or non-recyclable. If the design guide lists a preferred designation for your component or potential package, this is more of an acknowledgement that you have followed the design guides appropriately. There may need to be some basic benchmark testing or sortation testing that is completed, but for the most part, we know it's a known truth, it's miscible within the reclamation stream. Moving down the line to critical guidance, this becomes more of an assessment. There is some unknown here, something that is new and innovative that needs to be assessed in more detail. Our protocols in this space are more robust. We look at this as a very wide picture of the potential impacts of recyclability. There's a lot of due diligence that needs to be put in place to assess through critical guidance. In the label space right now, CPET labels and adhesives must go through critical guidance for an entire label construct to be considered for preferred, or for that entire package to be considered preferred as the APR guidelines address. Responsible innovation is very rarely used. This is typically reserved for innovations and products that have some feature that has the potential to impact a portion of the reclamation stream outside of our guidance. Very, very rarely this happens, but things such as magnetism, new and innovative materials that we've never seen before, again, anything that our current protocols, testing standards do not assess fall into this bucket. This entails much, much more assessment than just critical guidance. It is real-life trials at MRFs, at reclaimers, to validate that the product flows appropriately, that those within the reclamation stream are comfortable with the product, and that there is a viable pathway towards a recyclable product utilizing that information. So, it sounds simple in theory, but it is complex to traverse the different pathways. The easiest way to do so is to go to our website and look at the recognition landing page, specifically the preferred design section. If your individual component, construction of components, or full package has an eligible recognition pathway through preferred design recognition, that is the appropriate pathway to traverse. If not, submit a pre-approval authorization to the APR, and we will assess and dictate basically which testing needs to be completed and which appropriate pathway to traverse either critical guidance or responsible innovation. We try to take the guesswork out of this, but again, referencing the design guides, making sure that there is a preferred dictation for your product or assembly of products is the easiest way to determine the pathway. Otherwise, please contact us and we'll help you through the process. I'll get into these programs and how it works in a little bit more detail as well. So preferred design recognition, again, this is an acknowledgement of recyclability. It doesn't take too much time to process. Generally, all of the testing, any qualifying materials are prepared before submitting an application. An invoice is paid, and within 2 to 6 weeks, you generally have a determination from the APR. This is reviewed solely by APR technical staff. So again, when speaking of the benefits of the program, that qualification, we are really the independent third-party experts on plastics recycling. You know that the assessment from the APR is going to carry weight both with your customers and as you're looking to traverse upcoming legislation. The critical guidance pathway is a little bit more complex. This first entails a submission for a pre-approval. Once that pre-approval is granted, you are allowed to facilitate critical guidance testing at an independent third-party laboratory. This is vital. Critical guidance is, again, a more in-depth assessment. We require that testing to be done off-site. After that testing is complete, there is a webinar that is conducted within APR membership to broadcast this innovation and to introduce it into the reclamation community and to a community of your peers. Anything coming through critical guidance, again, is an innovation. We want to make sure that the reclaimers and the MRFs and those handling the material are comfortable with this entering the stream beyond what our current guidance assess. So that webinar is very vital. It also provides you a platform to broadcast and market the innovation. After that webinar, there is a panel of peers, and by peers I mean non-competitors, that will review and assess this application and vote whether or not it receives an APR recognition. A reclaimer and or MRF is part of this committee. So you are getting a direct dictation from somebody that is handling your product in the industry that it will be compliant with their needs. Responsible innovation, as I mentioned, is a little bit more complicated. This entails those on-site trials at MRFs and reclaimers, as well as some additional testing that may be needed to be completed. It follows the same pathway as critical guidance. Again, there's probably only been a handful of these within the history of the APR. If that path is dictated, we will assist you moving forward. So, it sounds pretty simple enough, right? Do some testing, submit for assessment, and receive a recognition, and know that your product is recyclable. Unfortunately, label constructions can become very, very complex. There are a lot of specifications that need to be made depending on the intended substrate for which that label is being applied, for the surface area of the label, and some other key considerations that need to be made that will impact the testing required to receive APR recognition or even for a self-assessment of recyclability. I'll go through some of these in a little bit more of an overarching overview right now, but know that each individual label and each individual packaging designation will carry different requirements as far as what testing is necessary. Material choice is likely one of the most important design choices that a brand or converter can make in their label substrates. Label substrates must either completely liberate or be miscible with the base resin stream. So a PET container with a CPET label, as long as those materials are miscible and the label itself is not causing issues as far as clumping, melting, discoloration, we want to make sure that they're compliant. Liberation primarily occurs during washing, float sink, or during flake classification. So the material properties such as density become very important. A base container that has a high density such as PET mixed with a low density BOPP film, as long as those materials can separate, they can be considered compliant. A polystyrene label on a PET container, that's going to create a need for more additional testing because those materials are likely to flow together. In addition, high coverage limitations exist depending on the material. Like with like. A 100% coverage shrink label on a bottle without the ability for our optical sortation equipment within MRFs and reclaimers that identify what the material of a package is to be able to actually see the package underneath the label, those packages could be missorted. So a polyolefin label on a polyester or vice versa, if NIR is not capable of traversing those labels, could dictate that label takes that long and expensive, or not label, that entire package takes that long and expensive trip to the landfill, just because of the surface area coverage and the choice of label material. For PET and natural HDP containers or applications, this is where things get a little bit more complicated because now we're concerned about the impacts of color. Both color from the label materials, inks, and other substrates that are used to create labels. Only inks that have been tested on the intended substrates are preferred. So, if you have a bleeding ink on a label that is intended for a PET or a natural HDP product, that will more than likely receive a detrimental categorization from the APR because it has the ability to impact the final color of that resin, which is really a quality and or yield decrease within the reclamation system. We want the inks to not impact the color and not impact the potential for economic strains within wash water. So as those inks liberate, we want to see caustic resistance or resistance to whatever wash system that they are entering. The solubility of an ink can impact can not only impact the discoloration of the material, but it can impact potential fines and fees from a POTW as a reclaimer is sending their wash water away from the facility. Surface area and optical sortability, I already mentioned that material comes into play here, but color as well. So the APR's limitations for labels, for a container that is greater than 550 milliliters, basically 75% of the full coverage of that container from base to the tip of the neck, or 55% for any container smaller than that. As long as that label substrate is greater than those surface area coverages, a color dictation or color sortation test needs to be completed, regardless of ink coverage. You can see a product here on the right that recently went through some APR trials. It was a multi-collaborative effort between an ink supplier, converter, and label manufacturer to design a potential label construction, shrink construction for English Mountain. This label has a very high coverage, even though the ink coverage may be less than 55%. Because that label coverage is greater than the APR threshold, we need to assess for color sortability. So again, that ink coverage that dictates a color sortation test for PET or natural HDPE is dictated based on the size of the label, not the actual coverage of ink. A very intricate ink pattern with a lot of clear area built into it, even with a very low percentage coverage of ink, can still sort incorrectly just based on the sensor's ability to see color and see that product as it's moving through the MRF or reclamation stream. Metallization is probably the last component that can really dictate the recyclability or potential impact of a label. Solid foils are generally non-recyclable. These are going to be seen by metal detection units or by magnets, again, causing that package to take that long and expensive trip to the landfill. Anything that receives a non-recyclable designation by the APR is going to be removed or liberated from the reclamation stream. So we want to avoid that whenever possible. Transfer products, metallic inks can be preferred so long as they test or have spherical equivalencies of 12 millimeters or less, 16 for PET applications. And the use of transfer products up to 310 square centimeters or metallized films to the 194 square centimeters does not require additional testing. Those involved in this room with the APR have completed the due diligence to dictate that metallized testing is not needed for any surface area coverages greater than that, because the likelihood of that material to be ejected or misseen by metal sortation equipment is very, very low or next to nothing. What about perforations? I get asked this a lot and how it complies with APR design guidance. The APR does not take into account consumer interactions with products when assessing recyclability. This means that a perforation with a dictation for the consumer to remove the label before recycling does not meet our standards of recyclability. The interactions between perforations and more commonly used recycling equipment, such as delabeling devices, is currently being explored, and we're trying to develop guidance in this area if an appropriate perforation can be designed that would allow a package to be considered more recyclable without that consumer interaction. So, that was kind of just touching the base of some of the key design features that need to be assessed when creating a label and marketing it as recyclable. It gets more and more complex depending on what substrates are intended, what materials are being used, what adhesives and inks are being combined, surface area coverages, metallization decorations, all of these things come into play. It takes a lot of work to assess for recyclability. One of the key benefits of the APR Design for Recyclability program is our online APR Design Recognition Directory. Many of you in this room have participated within this, and it basically creates a shopping list for converters and brands to find products or individual components that can be combined to create more recyclable substrates. So, instead of starting from scratch, you have the ability to find those suppliers that can guide you through the process, that have materials that are readily recyclable and have already received designation by the APR to be utilized in recyclable packaging. With that, I will open the floor up for questions.
Hey, Ruben, question. So just to help everyone else kind of understand this a little bit, can you talk a little, you mentioned it a little bit earlier in the presentation, but obviously APR was more of it's a voluntary commitment, but there is some call outs in some of these EPR schemes, so that it could be mandated in the near future. Can you kind of hint on that a little bit?
Yeah, potentially. So we've been in conversations with CAA as they're developing their eco-modulation schemes for EPR. And if we're looking at the European models and how Recyclass and their recyclability dictations have been involved into EPR, it would be a pretty strong assumption to assume that categorization by APR and how that applies to plastics packaging may more than likely dictate how those eco-modulated fees are assigned to a package. So something that is considered preferred would have a much lower fee than something that would be considered detrimental, or something that would be considered non-recyclable. So as EPR begins to become more implemented and more integrated within our standards as well, we'll see more of that come to fruition is kind of my anticipation. As of right now, I don't believe any of that is concreted in, but it is, again, a very, very strong assumption based on those models that we are more than likely currently following. Yes.
What about RFID? I assume that's still treated as all that.
It can. RFID is a very, very strong consideration within plastics recycling right now, and it is a very hot topic. As many of you in the room are probably aware, Walmart has dictated that they'd like to move to putting RFID on basically every single product in their store to help with their supply chain management and order fulfillment. RFID can have major, major impacts on plastics recycling. Depending on what metals are used, historical RFIDs may contain silver. Granted, I've been told that that is no longer really the case, but we don't want to see heavy metals as part of the plastics recycling stream, as that can remove the ability to gain a food contact designation for a lot of the resins. Beyond that, the content of metal, again, following the same standards of metallization that I just discussed, could cause a product to be ejected inappropriately. So a lot of these are using solid foils or other metallized components, which may trigger metal detection. So again, it could take a perfectly recyclable package and then send it on a long and expensive trip to landfill. I'll regurgitate that a lot today. Beyond that, the implementation of the RFID needs to be assessed as well. Where that RFID is placed on a container may also impact recyclability. An RFID could be integrated into a label, could be basically a label itself that is put on a label or directly on a package or even on a cap enclosure. And depending on what the base resin of that package is, really should dictate where that RFID is implemented and how it is segregated from the material if it is not miscible. So the components of an RFID, very much like a label, there could be adhesive, there's metal, there's other material components that are present. Those need to be assessed just like a label. Are they miscible with the base resin of the container? If no, can it be liberated and separated from that stream? That can be done by a variety of mechanisms. Placing an RFID label on a BOPP label, on a PET container, as long as that label floats off, we're separating off the RFID, versus sticking that directly on the PET container. Now it is bound to that depending on how the adhesive and the density of the RFID materials interact. So there are a lot of considerations being made right now. Several companies have actually began traversing or have completed critical guidance recognition on RFID technologies to determine if they can be miscible. We believe at the APR that they absolutely can, and there's a great potential for RFID to provide even further benefit to the reclamation industry. Having real-time data on hand that can be read by MRFs and reclaimers, a brand could now trace their packaging through the reclamation stream, can trace the yield and capture rate of their packaging. And it can also allow for additional sortation activities for packages that are harder to identify by existing sortation equipment. So there's a great opportunity here, but a considerable amount of care and integration needs to take place before it can become a mainstay within plastics recycling. Yes?
What is the future of full coverage shrink sleeves as far as recyclability?
Yeah, so in full coverage shrink, the question was, what is the impact and future of full coverage shrink sleeves on recyclability? And again, it really is dependent on the intended bottle. So a shrink sleeve on a polypropylene or an HDPE bottle versus a shrink sleeve on a PET is going to have different dictations. A full coverage shrink sleeve with full print on a PET bottle right now basically has the means to get that tolerated but needs improvement designation. There is not currently a route to a full coverage print preferred shrink, at least to my knowledge, because it's going to sort more than likely as colored PET. That perforation work that's ongoing may open up a pathway for that label to be liberated before it actually sees color sortation testing for PET, which would allow recyclability. Beyond that, when looking at other substrates like HDPE, generally that's going to flow with a colored HDPE stream. So shrink sleeves on natural or colored HDPE, as long as they are full coverage, can be perfectly recyclable and can be preferred within the APR's designation. Similarly with polypropylene, most polypropylene streams are going into a colored component. So as long as that shrink sleeve is polyolefin based and or allows the polypropylene underneath to be read, it can be very miscible within the stream. So primarily with natural PET, that is the one point of concern, but it does not render the product non-recyclable as long as the PET underneath can be read as PET.
Hey, Ruben. So one of the most common questions that we get is, there's an APR design recognized label, an APR design recognized ink. Can I put the two together and call it good? Is that the path, or is there another path that actually needs to be taken for it?
As of today, that is not the path and is one of the largest misconceptions in the industry right now. Taking recognition A and recognition B and combining them together does not equate to a preferred product. As we know, there are different surface energies, there are different top coats, there are different implications with labels that need to be assessed with inks. So to be eligible for a APR design for recyclability recognition or to be categorized as preferred, currently we need to see the entire label construct tested together. So for shrink sleeves, that would be the film itself and an ink. For labels with adhesives, that would be the entire construct with the adhesive, the film itself, and the ink. We need to see the label tested in its entirety. If that is not possible by the converter, it's obviously still a better choice to choose an ink that has APR recognition or has a preferred status or has been tested appropriately, but we cannot confirm nor can we put an APR designation behind that performance without seeing the label tested in its entirety.
I'll ask a question that many people in the audience probably already know, but what is the trend today for a standard BOP label that's on a plastic bottle? Are they being ground up and then recycled that way, or are they being separated, liberated versus miscible?
Yeah.
Where's the world going in that regard? Where's it at right now?
So again, another very large misconception that I run into in the industry, that if your label is miscible or flows with the base resin of the product, that it is going to be recycled with the product. A CPET label that has APR recognition is miscible with the blow molded PET stream. The fact of the matter is as these materials are being processed, they go through an air segregation or eluturation step, and 90% plus of that label is lost in the system and goes to landfill. The only means to incorporate a label to really claim that circularity with the product is if it remains adhered. So IML applications and or retentive adhesive, where it is allowed in our design guidance, is basically the only mechanism for that label to flow in a circular path. Otherwise, the label material is generally going to landfill.
I'm not sure what he said, but I think what he said is that it generally gets removed.
Yes.
Base material is so much more valuable than the label material, so let the label material capture all the crap.
Yeah.
And let the base material be.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and depending on where that label comes off, on the front end delabeling, it's going to be a mixture of all labels. So we've got vinyl, PET, BOPP, paper, anything that can be together. It's a mixed material stream. There's really no value in capturing that. And at the reclaimer, whatever eluterates off, it's not going to be just label materials. There's going to be fines and other thin wall materials that come with that, and it's just not a viable material, raw material for anybody currently.
So most of those things that are on your list of preferred, pre-approved materials, pressure-sensitive materials, are ones that facilitate removal so that the product can be recycled.
Yes.
Everyone in the room knew that, right? Yeah, okay.
All right, I think that is all I have time for today. I will be at the reception tonight as well if there are any additional questions. So thank you for your time today.